Hello friends, so we're almost nearing to the end of the chapter and I'm so excited to finish the chapter because this is much informative and interesting chapter. So after this there will be one more part and with which we are completing the evolution chapter, but this session is much important because all the intricacies of the chapters have been placed in this session. So we're going to talk about various theories of evolution, on Lamarck's theory, Darwin's theory, about mutation theory, modern synthetic theory, and towards the end of the course I'm going to keep interesting stories for you all to study, like to just get to know, because I found this particular story on industrial Melanism to be much important. So yes, please be patient, stay tuned and do watch. So first is Lamarck's theory. So Jean-Baptiste Lamarck, he proposed two theories, okay. So after which there were many critics and there were many people who just encouraged him. For example, if any popular people is there, then there will be two different types, communities of those people. One would be the critics and the other would always keep appreciating the people. For example, when you take heroes, there will be certain people who do a hero worship and the other people is like, no, I'm a fan of the other hero and this hero I don't like and all those things, right? So there will be always two sides of a pole. So that's what is on this Lamarck's theory also. So one is the theory of use and disuse, and the other is the theory of inheritance and acquired character. So I feel the sound is naming little difficult, is it? No, not such. It's a very simple theory and he kept all these complex names for these theories. So first is theory of use and disuse. It's very simple. He means to say that when an organism uses a particular organ, the organ will grow. When the organism is not using the particular organism, it will not grow. So that's the part. For example, you take in case of giraffes, right? What do? These giraffes, they always eat leaves, right, of the tall trees, and that's why these giraffes' neck is being so long and slender. Right, but in case of when you talk about these early snakes, that is during when you move back to 1,000-2,000 years ago, these snakes had limbs. But eventually, limbs aren't useful for these snakes because they undergo a slithering movement, and eventually these snakes, they tend to lose their limbs and they're all limbless reptiles. Fine. So that is all about the theory of use and disuse. When an animal uses a particular organ, it has been used and it continues to the next generation. When the organ do not use the particular organ, it is in disuse. So it will not continue further to the other generation. So that is the theory of use and disuse. So next is the theory of inheritance of acquired character, which means that a particular character has been acquired by an individual and that character is passed to the next generation. For example, when an animal thinks that, alright, I want a big claws to perch onto the trees, and now suddenly do you think that these animals will start growing long claws from the next generation? That's a big question mark, right? So that's what critics they confronted him for this, because how can you just say that when an animal thinks of something and they acquired and it will be passed to the next generation? So one of the critics called August Weismann, he proved Lamarck's theory wrong by conducting an experiment where he had a lab with 20 mice and he cut all the tails of these mice, and eventually after he waited for 20 generations. So every time the mouse is born, he cut its tail. So at the end of 20th generation also there were mice with huge long tails only. He didn't find any mouse with a shortened tail because he cut it in the first generation. So that's how he proved Lamarck to be wrong. And then Neo-Lamarckism is where there were many people who just liked Lamarck and his theories and they kept on supporting him. But the same theory of use, inheritance of acquired characters, they told it in a different way. What did they tell? They told, okay, alright, based on the different geographical location, so these animals have their own vegetative chromosomes, their somatic cells, and these cells, they tend to produce secretions, and this secretion make the organism to inherit, to acquire a character and inherit from one generation to the other generation. So that's all about Lamarck's theory. Next is Darwin's theory, and Darwin's he was much he was so fond of traveling the world. So while he was traveling, he had to take notes, and these were his findings in his books. So he had 5 different findings. One was overproduction, struggle for existence, universal occurrence of variation, origin of species, and natural selection. So first is overproduction. So overproduction just mean to say that he observed these salmon fishes in the ocean. So now these, okay, yeah, one more learning is that fishes aren't plural. So it is a common term for both singular and plural noun. So it is just fish. Even if there is one fish, it is a fish. And if there is 10 fish, there is a fish, right? So now salmon fish, they lay 2.8 million eggs. So now what happens when all of these 2.1 million eggs hatches, then the ocean will be filled only with salmon fish, right? So that's why he told about the second theory, which is the struggle of existence. So there were like 3 struggle theories. One is intraspecific existence, then next is interspecific, and then is the environmental. For example, when you talk about this intraspecific, so there is a fight between the same species for food and shelter. So that's how they struggle for existence. When you talk about this interspecific, there is a fight between the different species for their existence. So where they prey on the same food and there is a fight between them. That is interspecific. Next is environmental. Environmental is something where due to the different like natural calamities, if it's a famine, it's a flood, or if it's drought, whatever, so it is all basically going to affect the animals living in that particular habitat. So that is the environmental struggle for existence. Third, he told, was universal occurrence of variation. Variation is where, as Mr. Lamarck told, the theory of inheritance and acquired character, he meant to say that there is a variation. So for example, when an animal wants something, there has to be a variation of character. So we studied about on the previous chapters, right, the theory of inheritance and variation. So that was his thing. Next, origin of species by natural selection. So when I always look at this point, I get reminded of Paulo Coelho's Alchemist. When you badly want something, the universe then conspires in getting that for you, right? So that's a famous saying by author Paulo Coelho. So that's all about this origin of species. So it is all the same. So when you badly want something, the universe helps you. So that's how the survival of the fittest. When you are fit, when you are able to adapt and accommodate in a particular region, yes, you will live long. So that's the theory for animals, and that is the origin of species and by natural selection. And then there were many critics who told Darwin that he didn't explain about the process of variation. He just told there is a variation among the species from one generation to the other generation, but he never spoke about the process of variation. Next is about the variation is non-heritable. He means to say that he never explained us about whether a variation is heritable or non-heritable and how exactly the variation happens. He never told us. And then about the vestigial organ. So last session we spoke about the vestigial organ as one of the significance of evolution, right? But he never spoke about, because he told, despite of him telling about variation, he never spoke about the vestigial organ. So this is all about Darwin's theory. And next is mutation theory, is where Hugo de Vries, so he's a much popular researcher in finding out the theory of mutation. So earlier chapters we spoke about mutation, right, where there is a sudden genetic change. So that's how he compared this mutation with that of the evolution. So mutation is a very important thing for the formation of evolution. That's from one generation to the other generation. That's what mutation theory is all about. So first important thing is where he spoke where this particular mutation is transferred from one generation to the other generation, mother from its offspring. Next is the no intermediate, which he means to say that there is no intermediate for this mutation. For example, when there is a tail in a particular species and the other species is been mutated with a shorter tail, that's a complete mutation, where from longer tail it's the shorter tail. Next is time to time, and mutation varies from time to time. For example, when the variation is constant, we humans wouldn't have evolved, right? So that's the theory where he says that mutation is time to time process. So next is modern synthetic theory, and all these terms we've studied in Principles of Inheritance and Variation chapter and the Molecular Genetics chapter also, where they mean to say that gene mutation is one such character, chromosomal mutation in the chromosomal is other such character, and genetic recombination where more of number of genes has been clubbed together and they form into a new individual, and then natural selection also the reproductive isolation. So next is, towards the end of the session we have kept a beautiful story where there's something called as natural selection, under which we are talking about the industrial melanism. So melanism refers towards the color code. Now what happened when you move back to 18th century, there were peppered moth. There was a moth and its name was peppered moth, and this moth was endemic to England. So now we are talking about before the industrialization, which means that before all the factories were set up, these moths were of two different colors. One is white and the other is black. Now these moths are very good at camouflaging, which means that if there is a white moth and if it views a predator, what does the white moth do? The white moth go and attaches itself towards a white background, right? And if it's a black moth, it goes and attaches itself towards a tree bark so that it hides itself from the predators. So this was the mechanism for them, hide and seek behavior. But after the industrialization in England, where all the walls became black with the industry, the flames, right? So now what, these white moths were restless, they didn't know where to hide. Suppose if they hide on a white background also, the white is no more a white, it is all this dull white and little darker white, so that the predators could easily view them and forage on them. So now what happened, after the industrialization there was a great reduction in white peppered moth alone, and black peppered moth survived. So which we mean to say that it is all because of these anthropogenic agents. Anthropogenic agents are nothing but it's all us, because of the human activities, how the animals are becoming extinct. So that is because of that is this industrial melanism, and this is, I don't know, I found this story to be much interesting, a real incident to be much interesting. Next is artificial selection. Artificial selection is also one such anthropogenic agent where we humans tend to have different breeds of dogs. So these different breeds of dogs didn't evolve at the first, right? So right from one dog family, we have just come on to a conclusion where there are many breeds. There are many, like dusky Pomeranians, there are like this white Pomeranians, brown Pomeranians, and we talk about this pug, there's like this colored pug, and if it's a Labrador dog, you have this white Labrador, you have even in case of golden retrievers. So all these are human made breeds, right? So humans do a research where what if we cross breed between a pug and a golden retriever, what exactly happens, how do the offspring. So now when you get a very cute breed, you tend to sell it in the market for 10k, ranging from 10k to lakhs, right? So that is because of artificial selection, because we humans are artificially, we are all grooming the different breeds. So I'm trying to tell that if we humans are so much capable of breeding all this and creating a new species, and you just think about the nature with its solar system, like you think about the solar system with its planets, and we all have a particular nature, right? In this nature, just imagine how efficient or capable and virulent these natures are to spread different species. So I'm going to end this session with this. In the next session, we will talk about the natural selection, Hardy-Weinberg law, and how did humans evolve. Thank you.